All right. Welcome, everybody, to another week of Acquisitions Anonymous. We're really glad that you're here. This is a podcast where me, Mills Snell, and my co-host, Bill D'Alessandro and Michael Girdley, we talk about usually two small businesses for sale, and we do it as anonymously as possible. So we want to get down into the details and cover specifics, but do it in a way that doesn't break confidentiality or disclose anything that these companies don't want public. We have a really fun guest today, Brandon Loffridge. We went through this beforehand and I'm botching it already. Brandon Loffridge. Brandon, really glad you're here, man. And thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do in flyover country, as they like to call it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I have bought a couple of small businesses myself. I spend my time mostly on a property management company that I bought, but not just operating that business, also doing value add multifamily deals. Bought that company about 5 years ago, and then my wife and I about 3 years ago bought a fairly good sized high end kind of custom furniture and home goods business in Kansas City, and she spends all her time running that. So pretty deeply entrenched in the small business acquisition world, although I've been pretty good the last 2 years of not torturing myself on BizBuySell and BizQuest and all those sites, but excited to do that today. And it's fun to see how the sausage is made. I'm kind of a OG Acquisitions Anonymous fan, if there is such a thing, on like a 9-month-old podcast.
Well, we're like 3 minutes in, and we probably already disappointed your expectations egregiously. Brandon, is your wife's business, is it mainly retail, like storefront, or does she do online or wholesale or things like that?
No, it's basically all retail. There is a little bit of online, but it's really insignificant in the scheme of the whole business, probably, 1% of revenue or less.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's really, yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll have some cool operating, just kind of nuance to bring to the conversation. So really glad you're with us. Michael, you have a word from one of our sponsors, right?
Yes. Well, in our continuing quest to stop losing money producing this podcast, we have a sponsor today. It's a new sponsor called Financial Clarity. They are a cloud bookkeeping service. So you can find them at finclarity.co. So global team, have talked with Jason about their business. And if you're a small business that's looking to get out of doing bookkeeping yourself, you want to outsource it to a cloud team. They know how to speak startups and small business, no contracts, fixed monthly fees, and responsible and dedicated. So they know how to do stuff around QuickBooks and Xero and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in focusing on your business rather than focusing on your bookkeeping, this week's sponsor is Financial Clarity and can be found at finclarity.co. So over to you, Bill.
All right. So we've got a pretty cool, two cool deals today. The first of which is an airport parking lot. Found this one on BizBuySell. I especially love this one because it is represented by the seller. And the entire listing is written in first person, which is great. So I'll just read you guys the intro paragraph. We're used to hyperbolic intro paragraphs, but here it is. Let me start by saying that it's once in a lifetime opportunity. You will hardly see this type of business for sale, especially at such a prime location and a low price. I would never sell if I didn't have to be absentee, staying mostly overseas due to my father's demise, taking care of my other businesses. So he goes on to list his Gmail address and says you can email him if you have questions. This is your basic airport parking lot. I mean, he's probably offended that I said basic. But this is a super prime, amazing airport parking lot at Houston Hobby Airport. Houston Hobby Airport. It says it's got a main canopy with aluminum sheets. It's got 2 entry and exit gates. It said it has a modern parking gate system with license plate recognition, checkout booth, a self-pay checkout kiosk, which means I think this is kind of trending toward that, maybe you don't need a manager. Maybe it's passive cash flow. People just drive in, park, and then swipe their card on the way out. It says no expense was spared to build the infrastructure of this facility. The asking price is merely to recover the cost of building the business, plus 3 years struggle to maintain and build running this very valuable very durable, lots of goodwill business.
Wow. There's so many
uh,
things. There are so many things we can say about this.
so let's get into the numbers. It says that the business has $917,000 of revenue and $644,000 of EBITDA, which leaves you with $619,000 of cash flow on that $917,000 of revenue. So that's pretty good margins, if you ask me. It was established in 2016, and they are asking $5 million for it. So my mental math tells me that's about 8 times cash flow for this airport parking lot. It says 45% of their business is booked by 6 third-party vendors and on our website. The other 55% is mostly direct booking, where customers are paying by credit or debit cards. I think this might also include their drive-up business, where somebody just kind of shows up and says, "Here I am, I want to park." So they're asking for $5 million. Oh, important to note, that $5 million does not include the land. That is 8x cash flow for the operating parking business, does not include the land. He does say here you may buy the land from him later once you get established with the bank and you feel comfortable with the business. He says there are 5 workable growth plans, and you can add about $100,000 of monthly income. For those keeping track at home, this business only makes about $50,000 of monthly cash flow. So this would be a significant growth plan. It says that Houston is the 5th fastest growing airport in the United States, up 35% from 2007 to 2017. This is a great airport business. It says we are 30% capacity, and net profit will for sure exceed $1 million over the next 2 years. Once a customer comes in, for sure, he is our permanent parking customer. He never switches to another parking lot at Houston Hobby. So this seems like a great business, at least from hearing the guy list it. What do you guys think? What's your take on airport parking?
Bill, I did some research on this while you were talking. I have to break in with some breaking news. I Googled the guy's email address. He's also selling a cash checking business in Sugarland, which is at the other end of Houston. So he's wheeling and dealing. There's some serious stuff going on.
He is. He's liquidating his United States assets.
His mother's demise? Is that one because his mother's demise?
No idea. And for those of you that don't know Houston really well, this is the secondary airport in Houston. So it was the original. This is the one on the southeast side of town, which is not the nicer side of town of Houston. Apologies to everybody I'm insulting on the southeast side of Houston. You could join the people in Corpus Christi being mad at me. But the nice airport, Houston Continental, which is where United runs out of and is the bigger airport, is up on the north side. So this is actually the secondary airport, not the primary one. But this is where Southwest does all their work.
I love here that he says, I can provide training for 10 days after the closing date. Should convey complete knowledge in 10 days, but $500 a day after that.
You know who this guy is? He's that uncle that you have that's like the scheming uncle that's always scheming stuff and like takes you right before the main course at Thanksgiving and is like, take a look at my business listing. Isn't this great? Give me some feedback. And he doesn't really want feedback. And he shows you something that looks like this. This is exactly that guy.
Well, okay. So they want 8x. So this is an operating business, right? Doesn't come with land. So there's not really a real estate play. Land's not priced in. Who knows what he would want for the land if you ultimately wanted to buy it from him. Obviously, a diligence point here would be, what are the terms of my lease? Because, right, I would make sure I extracted a very long-term, very renewable lease from this guy as a condition for him keeping the land and selling me the operating business. So the valuation of this thing, 8x cash flow for an operating business, do you guys think that's fair? We got some feedback on Twitter that folks would like to hear us talk more about valuation. How would you guys think about valuing a business like this without the land, just the operating business?
One quick point on that, to make matters worse, so to speak, is that I'd be willing to bet that this guy doesn't charge himself rent on the land, right? I think this EBITDA number, this $644,000, is obviously unadjusted. But if you buy this thing and you have to lease the land from the guy, you could be taking 100, 150, 200. It depends on what he wants for the dirt, right? For the lease of the space. So I think the valuation that he's asking is actually, it probably gets higher on a multiple basis, just because I think the true cash flow after the adjustments of what your life is going to be like post close, I think it's going to be worse.
Yeah.
And Brandon, so I mean, comparing this to kind of a real estate like yield style investment and a lot of the stuff you do, like this guy's basically asking a 12 cap for something that seems kind of risky. Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, does it say anywhere how many employees he has? I mean, he did mention he's only selling it because it can't be absentee, which is it's maybe like refreshing for a business listing. Usually they're always absentee. Um, Employees, 5. Yeah, you almost have to be correct on the not charging himself rent when you look at the expenses with 5 employees there, unless they're all just minimum wage. So I was taking notes, a few notes as you were reading that, and all of mine had to do with the terminal value of the real estate that I was assuming was included in the $5 million. So throw my notes out. I thought it was borderline interesting at that price if the land was included, and if there was some other use for that land, because I was mentioning to you guys before we went live, in Kansas City, I'm noticing tons of these parking places pop up, and they're getting further and further from the airport. So that would be, my fear if I'm buying that this is, kind of institutionalizing, and people are maybe it's becoming more of an asset class like self-storage or something. And I know it already is. But I'd be afraid of, just that 30% going down to 20%. And there's nothing you can really do. I'm not so sure I understand why once they're a customer of this parking lot, they'll never go anywhere else. As it said in the description, there was nothing that he stated in there that was, especially unique to this business. So as compared to a real estate deal, I think it's pretty terrible valuation.
Well, I think you also have the problem with, parking, and I've gone really deep into parking recently because of reasons, but like parking is an amazing business because you're competing against only other parking options within walking distance of where you are, right? And if
Sure.
you're the closest parking thing to a very desirable thing like the Empire State Building or the Alamo here in San Antonio or anything like that, like you have a monopoly where, especially if people are just one-time visitors, you can charge whatever you want. This, at first glance, I was like, oh, a parking lot. Like, let's talk about it, because I've realized parking is such a good business and runs at 90% gross margins and all this stuff. But the problem with this is you're actually competing with everybody within a bus ride of where you are, not within a walking thing, because you're having to haul them back and forth to the terminals. And especially like you're talking about, Brandon, if you're at the Kansas City airport or the San Antonio airport or Houston Hobby, like there's so much vacant land around where this thing is. I've driven that area before. Like it's just a matter of time until once you get any sort of interesting yield on your investment, somebody comes in and builds a bigger one right next to you. And next thing you know, you're having to put $1 million in CapEx to grow your space and buy more buses and make all that happen. So,
well, and I know, so I Uber to the airport always. I don't want to park there unless it's one night, one overnight thing. And then I park at the terminal itself, and it's expensive, but it's one night, whatever. But my parents are the exact opposite. And my dad is the kind of guy, he probably would park 10 miles away if it was $2 cheaper. So I'm not sure who would have this loyalty to a place when it's kind of like self-selecting for people that are kind of, as frugal as possible, basically. I think that's who parks in the economy parking lots.
So I will say, when I lived in Denver, Denver's airport was very far from my house, and I went on business trips frequently where I was gone for a week, and I didn't want to. I actually did drive a lot. And the one thing I don't see mentioned in here is a loyalty program, because I parked regularly at the same parking lot just like this in Denver. And I did always go back to the same one because there was a loyalty program. They gave me perks, like they picked me up first, they dropped me off first. They made it a better experience. So I'm interested. I'm coming around to maybe a very naive view that this might not be as terrible as I initially thought it was, assuming you could lock up the lease for a long time. Here's why. If you bought this, I think maybe you could put in a loyalty program. I'd like to see some data on repeat customers. The other thing that's interesting about Hobby Airport in Houston is Hobby is actually like the close in small airport in Houston. This is not like the in the burbs, miles of desert all around airport. So I wonder, and I'd have to get more familiar with the local area, but I wonder if this is actually not a case where someone can drop a huge one in right next to you, because this is a little bit more of an urban airport in Houston. I'm, again, not super familiar with it, but it's maybe at least a little more confined, than like Denver's airport, which is just surrounded by dirt for miles in every direction. And if you could get this to the point where it was actually relatively passive, I mean, 5 employees seems like a lot. I don't think this is the smash it out of the gate, but if you're getting 20% yield here and you kind of grow with, Houston, right? I'd have to understand the demographics of Houston, and I don't know, maybe it doesn't suck. What do you guys think? Is this the naive view?
I mean, so
I think it kind of sucks, but to riff on what you were saying, I think one of the benefits you can do with something like this is, especially when the guy is so optimistic and wants to retain the land with the deal, I think a situation in which you could de-risk it and increase your return on invested capital by making your rent a percentage of the gross or a percentage of the profits could be pretty darn powerful here, right? And the game is not just total return, but return on invested capital. And you could de-risk some of the downside by just being like, okay, yeah, we'll rent it for 20 years. It's 10% of the gross. And that's just the way it's going to be. I think you could do some cool stuff around that in terms of thinking about how to structure this in a way that could work.
Think about the replacement cost of something like this, right? If a competitor wants to come in, they've got to buy the dirt or do a ground lease. And then you're not like building massive buildings, right? But you're talking about a ton of paving that's going on. That in most municipalities means you've got to have, on-site or off-site retention ponds. You've got to have like a fair amount of, environmental and engineering related work going on. Your upfront cost is probably pretty significant. I don't know that it's going to be, his asking price, right? Or the equivalent. But he's only at 30% capacity. So I would have a lot of questions around demand on this, right? Now, in my mind, he's basically pricing it for the demand he anticipates in 2 years and the amount of net income off of that, right? That to me seems a little bit more reasonable. So I think you're right, Michael. You almost have to tie, right, the valuation and the structure to this kind of future scenario that he's anticipating and make them all in sync versus just, sure, I'll take on all the risk and you take all the consideration.
Yeah, and I think you're also making, to some extent, a COVID bet one way or another. Like, is there going to be a Delta plus, a Lambda, whatever the next thing is? Is this going to be the new normal now, where there's just like a slight depression around business travel and all that kind of stuff? Because business travel still hasn't bounced back, like it was before. And a lot of these folks that are willing to pay a little bit more to do this, how many of those are business travelers? I guess we don't really know.
It depends too on how asset light this is. So, we obviously don't have, like some of the feedback we've gotten, we don't have their income statement. We don't have their balance sheet. But is this guy running his own shuttles, or is there an airport shuttle service that just happens to pick people up at all the parking lots? What's the economic, agreement between you and the airport? There's these 6 third-party folks who are utilizing, I think he said 45% of the space, but they're still only at 30% capacity. So if you are running buses, right, and some of these 5 employees are your bus drivers who have like a CDL, right, or like you're having to upkeep equipment and buses and maintain them and buy new ones, the business has only been around for 2.5 years. Like, I have a lot of questions about what's actually going on here and how it works. And I think this is the kind of seller that probably needs to get disappointed for a little while, that people aren't thinking it's as great as he does. But then things may come back to reality.
I think it'd be also interesting if the location of this, as there's a big percentage of the people that just drive to the airport and don't premeditate where they're going to park. Mm-hmm. And if this has one of those kind of tourist trap locations where they're the first thing at the Houston Hobby Airport, where it's like, park here, $12 a day, that's got some potential. Looking at this picture, Mills, it looks like he runs his own shuttle, because I've never seen a professional airport shuttle that's purple and orange like that one. So
do we think that's even the real picture? Is that even a real picture though of the business?
This is what Hobby looks like. If you go driving around the area around Hobby, that's what it looks like. Okay. There's a bunch of fields. Hobby's kind of sleepy.
You got Southwest in the background.
Southwest, yeah, that's exactly what, I think Southwest has like 80% of the traffic there and maybe more. And then the whole thing just feels like you're 2 good rainfalls away from being under 6 feet of water. Like that's what it feels like. I've been there. I've been probably driven down this street.
Michael, you actually bring up another risk you're taking on here, which is Southwest Airlines risk. Because if they pull out, this airport is toast. I mean, it's over. And all of a sudden your dirt is not worth anything. So there's the business travel risk. There's the Southwest Airlines risk / Houston Hobby Airport risk. I don't know about the other airport, if it's taking share or losing share or whatever. There's a lot of embedded risk here.
Yeah. Well, so, just data points, Southwest has been growing their presence here. They're also growing their presence at the hubs like Intercontinental, which is the other airport, the big boy one where United has their big operation, and then also going to like O'Hare and stuff like that. So Southwest, at least so far, like the past 5 years, has grown and like pushed all their international flights and stuff like that through this airport. So it's going the right direction. But yeah, you're exactly right. You're hugely dependent upon what happens with Southwest.
The question I have on a listing like this is, why hasn't a consolidator or a competitor bought this? Like, the fact that it's been sitting on Biz Buy Sell is a little bit worrisome to me, because there are multi-location providers, right? Like the one that I'm thinking of a lot in the Southeast, and I've seen other places, is like Parking Spot, right? Where they have these like polka dot buses. Those guys could totally afford to pay this guy probably what he wants, right? But they have tons of reps. They know how to underwrite these things. They know how they're going to drive more revenue and, utilize some of this excess capacity and put their own efficiencies in place. Like, they could blow this thing out of the water, and they are more than likely, right, acquisitive. They are buying businesses like this and taking a mom and pop to a professionally run. The fact that they haven't bought it and we're looking at it makes me a little bit skeptical. Like, what's wrong with it that they don't want it? Maybe they're already there, but I would just really want to dig into that.
Brandon, is there a world in which you pursue this deal?
Oh, absolutely not.
At what price? What price would you pursue it? Or
how much would this guy have to pay you to take this business?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. There is a world, I suppose. He gives it to me and convinces me that I'd love to live in Houston, I guess. But no, interestingly, there's he mentioned those aggregators, those booking aggregators. I didn't remember this until the middle of this discussion, but probably 10 years ago, I used to be kind of in the lead gen world, and kind of a friend of a friend, I believe it was airportparking.com, actually was a really successful outcome for an individual guy who he built, I think it was airportparking.com, and sold it to Quinn Street or one of those public lead gen companies from about 10 years ago for something on the order of $20 million. And that may be one of those aggregators that is sending them a lot of leads. I'd be interested to know if you could come in and go nuts on that customer acquisition, like a big one-time thing that you could budget for, if you could like target business travelers, to Bill's point, and really like inject a bunch of customers that are, if they're truly as sticky as he claims, which I know they're not, but if they're sticky, period, and look at that as a one-time upfront outlay, it's kind of interesting. And then the second thought I had is, I wondered if there's, and this takes away from the notion that it's a passive sort of real estate type annuity that is just a coupon clipper type business, but I wondered if there's just totally unrelated non-airport business that you could get. Like, is there a Miracle Mile car dealership kind of thing nearby, and you can take that excess capacity, and give them 20% at really rock bottom rates, something like that, or RV storage, And I know there's a million potential issues there, but something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're running out of time. One point I want to make on this is I would personally not even call this person or even consider talking about unless I had a really, really good, compelling strategic reason to do so. Just because this is anybody that writes a write-up like this is never going to be a reasonable seller. Like you're just dealing with a crazy person who is going to waste a ton of your time and going to talk you in circles. And I've just, from a pattern matching standpoint, like I've just seen so many people that talk like this, and I'm like, I don't want to talk like to people like this ever again. So it's an insta pass just in terms of what he's telling you by the way he's talking.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, Michael.
That's very nuanced.
By way of wrapping this up, if you are interested in the airport parking space, during kind of my research for this episode, there is an article in Appraisal Institute Journal called They Pave Paradise, Appraising a Parking Lot. It is 13 pages long and quite good. They go into like all of the financial metrics like valuation per space, CapEx over time. If you are interested in buying a parking lot, you should definitely read this. And you can find it by Googling airport parking lot valuations is the first result. It's called They Pave Paradise, Appraising a Parking Lot by the Altus Group. You can check it out.
It's amazing, Bill.
That's a huge gem. Thank you. As you know, I'm really getting into parking lots.
All right, Michael, you got deal number 2, right?
Yeah. Okay. We got another one that's a little bit out there. So, cool. So this one is, I forgot which brokerage this is out of. The Firm.
Yeah.
Who's an interesting firm to say the least. So this is a railroad terminal logistics business, and the headline is Railroad Terminal Logistics with 32% profit margin. If you're watching us on YouTube, we pull up the teasers, and so you can see them there, but we'll read them out for those of you just on regular podcast audio. So says it's been in business for 20 plus years, 4 locations in Pennsylvania and New York. It cash flows $1.4 million per year. They are asking $7.7 million for it. So what is that? That's about 5 times free cash flow. And it runs about $4.5 million in revenue, profit margin about 32%. So really pretty good. $2 million in equipment, 36 employees, owner, operations, and then it lists a whole bunch of different people here: night managers, mechanics, train load operators, crane operators, truck drivers, and clerical, all cross-trained to work at each location. And they have 4 locations across Pennsylvania and New York, from the mid-Atlantic to the Northeast US. And so in terms of what they do, I think that was something we talked about when we were preparing for the episode here earlier. The way I understand this is like when railroad cars come into the terminal, like they have to end up someplace. This is a logistics company that handles all the getting stuff on and getting stuff off for that. So they have 4 locations, been in the Northeast for over 20 years. And so they do terminal operations for inbound and outbound freight clients. They do clerical and inspection work for inbound and outbound rail freight, equipment maintenance, repair, transloading of commodities such as frac sand, swamp mats, propane, residual waste, hazmat materials, and agricultural products. So this is like Dirty Jobs Incorporated is what these guys do. Diverse customer base is transportation providers, oil and gas companies, agricultural industry clients, PennDOT, the energy sector, plastics and lumber clients. And everyone on the team of 36 highly experienced staff is cross-trained and can work on each separate entity within this company. The owner is retired and has an adult daughter who will stay on for 5+ years and continue as general manager. So that's something to put a pin into. Corporate headquarters is in Scranton, the Electric City, headquarters of from the show The Office. So pretty great. This entity supports. Oh, the funny thing about The Office, I don't know if you guys noticed, if you look closely, it wasn't filmed there. It was actually filmed in LA. And you can see it when you kind of look past, you're like, that doesn't look like Pennsylvania. It's because it's LA. So super cool. This entity supports the accounting, bookkeeping, insurance needs, and HR. There is an intermodal terminal operations company also located in Pennsylvania, and a bulk rail facility in New York that is a short line railroad and is project oriented, handling everything from mats for pipelines, rebar for road construction, and utility poles for the power industry. And then they have another one, which is a rail facility in Pennsylvania with a certified truck scale and multiple conveyors and people, cranes, heavy construction pieces, all that stuff. They think that substantial growth is inevitable for this family of companies, expanding their service area further south, adding more terminals, increasing commodities, and looking further into increasing residual waste removal services would be tremendous and diversified. And here they kind of go through this stuff again. Owner is getting out because he's retiring or she's retiring, and the business is for sale. So $2 million in assets, of which $2.2 million is equipment and vehicles. So sand loaders, construction pieces, then some inventory, and $200K in accounts receivable, which may tell us something about the way their cash flow works. And it looks like they put a big asterisk here, which is interesting, around the value of the assets, and they may be depreciated, replacement cost, or fair market value for that $2 million in assets that they say you're getting. So that's it. Railroad terminal, and and then we have the P&L over the past few years, and it is it's a shrinking business, actually.
No, it goes, oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah, they have it backwards.
I hate this, by the way. The most recent year should be on the right.
Not if you're shrinking, Bill. That's not the rule number one of business brokering is you got to trick people.
Oh,
So this is a shrinking business. And they've
gone
making less
from
money each year.
6.8 million in sales to 4.5 million in sales over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
There's got to be somebody that's bought a business and just did it without thinking very hard, and then looked back at the sim a year later and said, "Oh my God, I read that backwards."
What do you think this management fee line item is? It says paid internally. It's $500,000 a year in an ad back. And it says paid internally, phantom expense 75%. There's already a line item that's compensation to owner.
Is that intercompany resource charge outs? Because they talked about centralizing billing and a bunch of that stuff in Scranton.
But phantom expense,
that's allocations.
Makes me think.
I think they've got two entities. So, when Mike was reading it, he said the corporate headquarters are in Scranton. This entity supports the accounting, bookkeeping, insurance needs, and HR. So I think they've got an HQ, and then they've got like 4 terminal field operations, and there's probably some intercompany transactions here. So that is definitely going to be a diligence point. I assume you're acquiring the assets of both, and then they're not going to try to keep the service org. You definitely want to understand why there are 2 orgs. Is this some sort of tax thing? Is it even kosher? Is it, are we trying to trick each of the individual terminals to thinking we're a single unit operator? I want to understand why they did that.
I'm always interested in the ratio of, unadjusted to adjusted earnings. And in this case, the amount of sellers' discretionary earnings that they're advertising is 1.4 million. The book net operating income is 1/10 of that, right? So for every $1 of true net income, there's $9 of ad backs. That scares me. Right, because
and then
it's messy.
Some of this to your point, some of this just should not be add backs, right? Like reality is like depreciation is a representation of capital I'm going to have to keep into the business on an ongoing basis and put in to upgrade equipment and all that kind of stuff. Equipment rental, like to run the business, like you clearly went to go rent equipment that you need to run the business. Like you can't get not credit for that. Like that's an expense. That's the way it should be. And then I don't know what the travel is. Maybe they went to the Bahamas or something. But like that's just, that's also why I'm like a huge non-fan of like putting personal expenses in your boat through your corporation if you plan on selling it at any point in the future, because people look at it and they're like, why are you doing that? Like, and then you start, looking at what else in here is fake, phony, or shouldn't be counted in the ad backs as well.
I take a little bit different approach. I'm okay if it's, this is going to sound weird. I'm okay if it's more egregious, right? Like if you spend $500,000 a year on your boat, unless it's like every weekend you're taking clients out on your boat and I can never replicate that, I'm like, okay, that's great. It's all falling through to the bottom line. But this whole like intercompany management fee, trying to adjust back the pension, or you'll see cases where they're like, oh, we overpay our employees. And so we're just going to, reduce their comp, by 25%. It's like, who in the world would do that? Like no new buyer can come in and just arbitrarily like eliminate the bonus, and keep and keep their folks. So I like when it's egregious like this. I agree. You start to illuminate, right? This person maybe wants to play in the gray, or they maybe want to kind of stretch the limits of what's possible with the IRS, which is not great. But I like when it's egregious.
That's fair.
I think that the depreciation line is interesting. If you look, 2018, it's 450,000. 2019, it's 67,000. 2020, it's 172,000. Relative to 2 million in assets, which there was an asterisk, so we don't really know what that represents, whether that's the book value or whether that's what the replacement cost would be, or who knows, maybe it was what they paid for it all initially. Whatever that value is, it sounds like an asset-heavy business, and $172,000. Your point was good about how that shouldn't be an add back in the first place, but $172,000 does not sound like, unless cranes last 20 years, which they probably, well, maybe a crane does, but trucks and things like that certainly don't. That does not sound like a recurring number that'd be reasonable, let alone the fact that it shouldn't be added back.
Well, and do you think this kind of signifies that maybe they've been languishing or underinvesting in keeping their equipment up? That's what that smells to me. It's like, oh, you bought some new trucks and did a lot of maintenance and spent on upgrading that stuff back in 2018, and then you've been not spending as much as you should have.
Yeah, I don't know how much visibility a business like this has into future revenue. Like, I just don't know enough about how they, kind of get their customers. But it almost seems like maybe they lost a client and then started preparing for this sale, or lost, something, because revenue has gone down so significantly, and depreciation has gone down. So, like you said, maybe they stopped then investing, and kind of paints a really bad picture.
Well, they shrunk by 1.5 million from 2018 to 2019, and then they shrunk by about 900,000 from 2019 to 2020. So I would be very curious to understand, at zero and first, like, why are you shrinking? Because things like this, like, theoretically should be really good businesses. Like, if you look at Coke Industries, like the core of the Coke Industries businesses, they have like this amazing monopoly on a refinery up in Wisconsin, Minnesota area that just pummels out cash all the time, because it's one of these odd things where it's like at the right place for the fuel coming in and the type of fuel coming in, like they're the only ones that can process it. Like, stuff like this should theoretically be good on a micro scale too, but I'm super curious why it's actually shrinking.
Brandon, who do you think who do you think is a plausible buyer of something like this?
I don't know the industry at all, but this is certainly not, I've bought an AC for my house and it was really expensive, so I think I'll buy an HVAC business type situation. I don't know what the analogy in this space would be. I've bought something online and it was shipped to me, so I decided to buy, the infrastructure. This seems like an ESOP or something. Sell it to the employees. Why is he not selling it to his daughter if she's going to go run it? ESOPs can be so attractive on a tax basis for the seller. Why wouldn't you do that and sell it to your daughter?
In this case, I don't think you have enough employees. You can totally sell to your daughter, but you end up with an ESOP this size. You end up with this dynamic where, like, if 5 guys want to retire, the company's cash strapped because they have to redeem all those shares. But you're right. There's got to be some, like, putting it out on the open market does not seem like maybe the most judicious way to divest it.
It's not a parking lot in Houston that you can learn in 10 days.
Well, there's got to be, like, so these guys have 4 locations, right, at 4 different rail terminals. Like, there are, I don't know how many rail terminals there are in America, but there are a lot. There's got to be other businesses like this at adjacent rail terminals in the same region that would probably love to expand and eliminate that whole central HQ in Scranton and combine it with theirs. This could probably make a ton of sense for the right strategic buyer. But for anyone else, I would think this is probably hard to get into.
I have a friend who bought a business that's not totally like this, but it's a transloading business. So they're on a rail spur. Stuff comes in on freight cars. They unload it. They hold it for a little while, and then they move it to a different transportation method. And it's a very interesting business, but, and I will say this guy didn't know he didn't really know that much about it before he got into it, but dealing, there's this idea of dealing with railroads that just really scares me because they basically have all the power, right? And they make decisions very, very slowly. And so if you are relying on, any of the major rail carriers to do business with you or to refer things your way or to hopefully get things unloaded at your terminal versus a different one, that just, I mean, I don't have those relationships, right? I can't call the guy at Norfolk Southern and say, "Hey, really throw me a bone here."
Well, there's a reason Warren Buffett bought those businesses, right? Like owns Union Pacific because they have a monopoly on the only railroad going through town, and they can charge whatever they want to some extent, and they're going to put the hammer on little guys like this. So.
Mm-hmm. I don't
The
know.
enthusiasm for this one is palpable, by the way, guys, just so you know. I've never seen it. This is it's right there with the Lego minifigs one, like level of excitement.
I end up being more enthusiastic than many about this. This could be really interesting. There's a bunch of red flags here with the central management, all the ad backs, the declining sales. But if it is possible that they have essentially a local monopoly on these terminals and that they're the only ones that can do it and they're entrenched and they got long-term leases and now you can, there's probably a price at which, if you believe in the future of these terminals, there's probably a cigar butt price at which this thing is very attractive, and you can model out a stream of future cash flows that maybe trends towards zero. And there's not very many competitive threats potentially, besides just the broad competitive threats to rail, if there are any, and I'm not well versed in. I think there's a price for this one. I don't know that it's 4.5x EBITDA like they want.
Well, this is all.
Okay, go ahead, Brandon.
Sorry, I was just going to say this is a case where it's probably, no offense to whoever the broker is, you said who it probably is, but probably not the right broker for something like this. They definitely don't have any strategic relationships, and it's pretty clearly not your classic kind of, search fund or corporate, kind of exile business acquisition. So from a competitive standpoint, in terms of, you say a cigar butt price, but sort of a cigar butt structure too, there's probably not going to be a great process run on this thing where, there's going to be 10 offers. It's probably going to be very uncompetitive.
This smells to me like a business being very poorly run, right? Like there's not a professional manager there. Like the daughter is staying as a GM. So clearly unless they ran a very broad process and then hired the daughter, it's unlikely that, they did that. Like, there's, I think, secondary thesis that I would have going in is what kind of operational improvements can I make here just to unlock a ton of value? Because you can see it just in here from the little things in terms of these, these cross entity things and this company doing that for this company. Like, it's just like, man, why are we making things so hard? I think there's tons of operational improvement that can be done based on what's here.
Well, we love it.
I would ask more information just because I'm curious about what's going on in here.
I don't hate it. This feels like one where you could go dig in and discover like, oh, this is one that looks terrible, but it's actually good, which is basically the only deals you're going to be doing these days at a reasonable multiple. Like you got to go find something that ostensibly, like at first glance looks awful. And then you're like, oh, when I double clicked on it, it turns out like, the broker was not that great and they positioned it in a weird way. And if I make these two changes, it's really good. And, that would be a reason I would look at this, is because I know other people are just going to pass on it.
It's a great point.
Exactly.
Well,
boom, I'm killing it today.
Yeah. Brandon, we're so glad you joined us. Thanks for helping illuminate some of these deals and some of the nuance around them. Want to say thanks
for
again.
Having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll have to have you back, and we'll find a retail furniture business so that you can just blow our minds. Thanks again
Sounds
to our
good.
sponsor for this week too. Thanks for supporting the podcast, and I hope that some folks will go check them out for their bookkeeping needs.
Yeah, they are finclarity.co, so cloud bookkeeping service. And then Brandon, I'm pulling up your Twitter page, which is super entertaining. You burst on the scene with like a super cool SBA thread back in the day. And how can our listeners and the legion of Acquisitions Anonymous people support you? What can we do for you?
Yeah, send me weird DMs or something on Twitter. That's fun.
Mission accomplished.
I got one the other day that just said something like "It's cold here" or something. I was like, okay, great. But yeah, Twitter's my spot. So at Lawfridge, which just looks like Laugh Ridge.
Laugh Ridge. Got it. Okay. Well, cool.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Sorry, I did my stuff.
No, that's good.
Great job.
Thanks so much, Brandon. And thanks to Bill and Michael. It's a fun one. Would you say 10 out of 10, Michael?
This is like 11 out of 10, the new baseline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always 11 out of 10.
We'll be back for another episode. Thanks.